Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much to those of you who are joining us live today, and to anyone who is watching us back at a later date. Thank you very much for your interest. My name is Gary Miller. I'm an asset management consultant at M4. M4's work predominantly revolves around supporting Scottish social housing providers with their various compliance requirements around asset management, energy efficiency and fire safety. And that work does extend to supporting them with district and communal heating as well. So the title of the session today is very ambitious: everything you wanted to know about district heating. I will put a little caveat in there. If I do my job right, I'm hoping very much that you walk away wanting to know even more about district heating. The purpose of the session today is intended as a kind of high-level overview. We're not going to focus a huge amount on the technical design and installation of heat networks. That is a very in-depth and bespoke subject all on its own, and it's certainly not one that I'm an expert in. So what we are going to do is we are going to talk about a lot of the work that we find that clients need help with before, around and after the kind of design and installation stages as well. So I'm not a heating engineer or a heat network consultant. Since joining M4 at the start of the year, I've been thrown into the deep end in terms of working on district heating and communal heating projects, some of the largest ones in Scotland, and it's been a great opportunity to learn hands-on. Oh, my apologies, I just accidentally knocked my notes off the screen. So the things that we're finding that a lot of our clients are looking for support with, the projects themselves are complex construction projects, but within local authorities and housing associations and other organisations, that construction is relatively well understood, even though there are specific design and considerations for heating systems. So what we find is a little bit harder sometimes to get a head around is some of the other stuff around that. So things like the role of the heat supplier, some of the differences around metering and billing, legislation and requirements, consumer protection. We're going to look at the basics. What is a heat network? Why do we think they're good? What do the Scottish Government think about them? And we're going to look at a bit about the support that's available for some of the funding around heat network projects at the moment. So if you've been to any of these sessions before, the last couple has been myself and our director, Dave Falla. He's actually unfortunately been called away at the moment, but he is hoping to join us towards the end of the session so that he might be able to help with any questions. So if we just get into it then. So district heating and communal heating systems are types of heat networks. A communal heating system is a system by which thermal energy is distributed from one or more sources of production to one building comprising more than one building unit. And a district heat network is a network by which thermal energy is distributed from one or more sources of production to more than one building. So these are the definitions that are used within the Heat Network Scotland Act 2021, and we're going to reference that quite a lot in today's session, mostly because it's the context we're working in. Within the district heating side of things, when we're talking about a building unit, what we're talking about is an area of a building that's been designed or been altered to be used separately. So the picture on the left there of the high-rise flats there is a great example. It's one building, but it contains lots of individual domestic dwellings. The same would be true of an office block commercial unit with multiple organisations within that. When we're talking about thermal energy, that can actually be heating or cooling. Particularly in Scotland, we talk about heating an awful lot, but the weather that we've had this summer and some of these heat waves and really high temperatures have been causing problems across the UK. So certainly cooling has been brought back onto the table. District heat networks where they've been designed to do so can offer efficient cooling as well as heating. Generally within the heat networks, the thermal energy is transferred via hot water, which is distributed around a network of insulated pipes. The size of these networks can vary massively. So a couple of examples of that, one of the communal heat network projects that I've been working on is a retirement development, and it's only 12 small individual flats. Another that I've been working on, again, communal, one building has 100 flats. And then we can, when it comes to the district heating side of things, they could be small scale, a couple of buildings. They could be massive ones with hundreds of buildings and kilometres of insulated pipework. I was reading over the weekend there about Copenhagen, which is apparently has 98% of their buildings within the city are connected to their heat network. So these are established technologies. They're used effectively around the world. Much like heat pumps, we've not seen a lot of it in this country because of the quality and of our gas distribution network and the cheapness of gas over the years. Sometimes there's a concern or a misconception that the end customer, the person who's drawing heat off the network, won't have much control over any aspect of that, but it's not always the case. Customers can be given full control of their consumption and their comfort. So we can give them heating controls and heat exchange units, which allow them to control the heating patterns and temperature within the home and how much energy is actually drawn off the heat network. That allows them to budget and control their costs. And we're also able to use heat meters as well, so that they can be billed accurately and they're only paying for exactly the energy you've used, and that's good all around. So what are the benefits of heat networks? Both new and existing heat networks have significant potential to contribute to our climate and fuel poverty targets. A well-designed heat network has potential to deliver heat at scale far more efficiently than lots and lots of individual heating systems which are generating heat within the home, often involving combustion. There's even greater potential when we think about the heat network scope for incorporating low carbon heat sources and other types of renewable technologies. Heat networks are very much local infrastructure projects, and they are able to make use of existing local infrastructure and industry. So it is possible to use what would essentially be waste heat from industrial process or from waste and sewage. Low carbon technologies such as heat pumps can be used, air source, ground source, water source. The great thing about using heat pumps is that one unit of electricity will result in multiple units of heat, so they're very efficient. And where we are looking to move to the electrification of heat anywhere, and particularly within our heat networks, the option to include local electrical generation and storage, such as PV and battery, can then make it even more efficient because it reduces the amount of electricity that has to be purchased from the grid at cost, and potentially, well, at the moment, definitely much more carbon intensive electricity. Thermal storage has quite a big role to play in these systems as well, and we're seeing that increasingly incorporated into heat networks. Thermal storage allows us to separate the demand for hot water from the production of hot water, which allows balances of the system and greater efficiencies. Many of our existing heat networks use fossil fuels. There are a lot of gas boiler systems out there, for example, but lots of other fuels are used, oil and slightly more of a sustainable biomass as well. What we do know is that even with the efficient systems which use combined heat and power boilers, which generate electricity as well, we know that these are going to need to be decarbonised anyway. And one of the great things about heat networks is they do allow for the heat source to be changed. So it can be possible to take these fossil fuel systems and upgrade them with heat pumps or incorporate waste heat. So anywhere we can improve efficiencies, we are able to reduce emissions and reduce running costs. And this is where the positive impacts on our climate change targets and reducing the impact of our energy bills and rising energy costs come in. This little quote at the bottom there is from the Heat and Building Strategy from the Scottish Government. And it states that the Competitions and Markets Authority found that up to 90% of heat network customers enjoy similar or lower bills than those with standard gas boilers, and heat networks can cut both emissions and bills. Now that doesn't sound like a massively bold statement, it's a little bit vague, but as we get through this, we'll talk more about how completely unregulated heat network markets are at the moment, and actually how impressive that is, given that there are very little rules to follow or customer protection in place around these things. So again, it's another example of heat networks being effective and efficient. So what do the Scottish Government think about heat networks? Well, unsurprisingly, they think they're great too. The Heat Network Scotland Act sets statutory targets for the deployment of heat networks by 2027 and 2030. The Act aims to accelerate the deployment of heat networks in Scotland through introducing a regulatory system which is aimed to boost confidence in the market, both from consumers and to give greater certainty to investors as well. So the Scottish Government, within the heat and building strategy, have identified a number of no and low regrets strategic technologies which they are confident can be deployed now. The technician's there, it's proven, and it can make an immediate impact on our progress towards our net zero ambitions. So these technologies are energy efficiency. So this is fabric first and demand reduction. We've been talking about this for a long time. The most important thing we can do, the biggest win we can have, is to actually reduce the amount of energy that we need to use to heat our homes in the first place. The other strategic technology is heat pumps. Various priorities there, the biggest priority being heat pumps in off-gas areas. Still a challenge with heat pumps in on-gas areas due to the cost of electricity there, and they also there's some considerations around which areas may or may not be moved on to hydrogen in the future. And the other one, and the subject of today's session, is the low and zero emission heat networks. So the targets that have been set by Scottish Government for the amount of heat which are going to be deployed by heat networks is very ambitious. So we've got the figures there at the bottom. They want by 2017, 3% of Scotland's heat to be provided by heat networks, and to that to ramp up to 8% by 2030. It's pretty huge. At the moment, we estimate it's around 1.5% of the country's heat is provided by heat networks. So even by 2027, which is only a couple of years away now, we're looking to double how many heat networks there are. The great news is there's a lot of exciting projects already in the pipeline, some of which we're going to talk about today. Just to sort of put that into context, those statistics there, if we were to think about that as equivalent to gas properties connected to the gas grid, how many of those we'd have to move off by those 2 dates? It's estimated that by 2027 it would need to be 120,000 homes, and by 2030, 400,000. So pretty huge. There's a lot of activity in this area though. The Heat Network Act here in Scotland is one example of that itself. We also have the Heat and Building Strategy, the Heat Network Delivery Plan. There's funding available for pre-capital support and capital support, which we'll talk about today. And I've particularly found the government very proactive in promoting these, holding workshops and focus groups. Something that we're very, very excited about, and I suppose it shows the level of support for heat networks. We're very proud to say that one of the bit larger projects that's been supported by M4 is receiving a visit today from Nicola Sturgeon, Scotland's First Minister. This is really in recognition of the ambition and the success of the project, which has managed to use Scottish Government funding and provide really quite significant impacts, positive impacts for an area of Glasgow which was very heavily has a very high level of fuel poverty. So those projects are the client there's and the housing provider is North Glasgow Homes. So we could talk about the NG Homes project a little bit later. But yeah, we're delighted to have Nicola Sturgeon there today. So the Heat Networks Scotland Act 2021 is really looking to pave the way for a regulatory framework and help grow the heat network market. I'm not going to talk about this in a huge amount, but I will summarise some of these key requirements that are introduced. So the first two there, the building assessment reports and the heat network zones. The assessments and zoning are putting greater consideration to thinking about heat networks in the planning stages of developments and providing additional support to do that. An example of that is that in April of this year, the Scottish Government published the Potential Heat Network Zones First National Assessment. This report provides the methodology and potential for heat networks, as well as providing heat network potential maps for the whole of the UK. Licenses and consents. The idea of this is to provide greater scrutiny of planned developments and to ensure that the high standards expected are delivered by fit and proper operators. Permits will be to give longer term assurance on potential customer bases to investors, and power for license holders should make it should reduce the time and cost of the construction and maintenance of these systems. And the final one, the asset schedule and the transfer scheme, place a requirement on their operators to have a scheme in place for the transfer to a third party if required, should, for whatever reason, they no longer be able to provide heat to their customers. So in terms of design and construction, not going to comment a lot on this today. It's a massive subject, as I said. It is one that M4 do get involved with, but as I say, personally, my role is in some of the other areas around heat networks. These are complex infrastructure projects. It could be said, or it is the case with any heating system, they need to be designed well and installed well, but that is particularly so with heat networks if we want to manage to capitalise on the benefits that they can deliver. And they do require specific sets of skills and experience to design, install and operate them. So at M4, we are involved in this. Whenever we do provide support for clients, we ensure that the support that we provide is in line with the Heat Networks Code of Practice for the UK. This has been developed by the Chartered Institute of Building Services Engineers, along with other bodies. And there is an examination and a certification there which can certify you as a heat network consultant as well. And we always recommend this. We think that it is a great tool. It helps to establish minimum standards and best practices to improve the quality and performance of district heating projects. And that's from the concept and design right through to the installation and operation of these systems as well. It's a really useful tool for procurement for buyers. It places quite a bit of emphasis on the quality of the brief from the buyer to make sure that you get what you want and what you need, and it gives advice on how to achieve that. You can specify within your tenders as well that you expect you specify the requirements and the process are followed according to this code of practice. And it also provides guidance on setting performance metrics. So, for example, things like the amount of heat loss that you'd expect from the primary network. It gives performance metrics for those, allowing testing across various different areas of performance and to allow testing at every stage to verify that. So one of the biggest differences with heat networks is that we're supplying heat. So we're not supplying electricity or any other kind of fuel which can be used to generate electricity, to generate heat within the home. Someone becomes a heat supplier. The heat networks meter and building regulations define a heat supplier as any legal entity, person or organisation that supplies and charges for the supply of heating to a final customer through a communal single building or district multi-building heat network. So basically, if you're a heat supplier, you can apply these. Now, what we're finding is that not everyone that's developing a heat network will want to become a heat supplier. Heat suppliers have a contractual relationship with their customers for the supply of heat, and there's various compliance requirements that you have to adhere to. The organisations that fulfil this role can vary greatly from network to network. There's a lot of dedicated heat network companies out there, or energy supply companies. The property developer may decide to do it. Housing associations or local authorities, infrastructure projects and new developments might decide to do it. Community organisations, management companies. So it's a really big list, and it is very varied in terms of who can become the heat supplier. So we'll talk about some of the challenges of compliance there. So there are advantages though. One of the advantages is that you as a company, you can set the charge for the kilowatt hours of heat that your customers can buy from you. Depending on your setting and your motivations, it would be possible very much so to do a socially conscious approach to that, setting really competitive and stable prices. It is a potential revenue stream, even if you are socially responsible or not for profit. You do want to generate a surplus so that can be invested. If you're a community group, you may wish to create a fund that allows reinvestment in the community, additional energy efficiency measures, environmental and landscaping works, those kind of things. So it really is quite varied. Metering and billing is similar but different on heat networks. Heat suppliers must comply with the heat networks metering and billing regulations, and we will talk a bit more about what's included within that. But I think one of the biggest differences that I wanted to highlight is that with the gas and electricity side of things, we don't even think about it. Our metering and billing is such a well-established process that it just happens. There's probably a meter in the property already. If there's not, more than likely our energy supplier would deal with that. Our energy supplier would deal with the billing side of things as well. But in the same way that I've just mentioned that someone developing a heat network might not want to be the heat supplier, they might not have the skills or experience or desire to be the metering and billing agent and take that on board either. So we find it is very common within the heat networks market to use a third party for this. So that third party could potentially do your metering and billing. I believe it is also possible for them to be separated, to be incorporated into your existing finance systems as well. So there's a couple of well-established companies out there, but it's a very, very new and emerging and competitive market. So it's an exciting space and there's a lot going on there just now. So back to the regulations then. The purpose of these regulations was to drive improvements in energy efficiency and reduce carbon emissions through providing clear and accurate billing. And this concept is pretty well known. We know that flat rates for energy use, such as heat with rent type agreements, that kind of thing, they don't particularly promote sustainable energy behaviours. So we know that where people are paying for exactly what they're using, particularly if we're talking about fuel poverty and scenarios of fixed limited incomes, people are likely to be much more conscious of their energy use. So that's one of the things it aims to achieve, and it just makes sure you've got much fairer, clearer and fairer billing if you're making sure that people are only paying for what they're using. The regulations can kind of be broken down into three areas. Metering and billing are a big part of that, as you would expect. But the other thing it introduces is a duty to notify as well. So there's a duty to notify government of a heat network, and that notification needs to be reviewed and resubmitted every 4 years. There's lots of information in there that would be used to audit your compliance as well with the regulations. So the kind of information that is asked for, there's general information like where is the heat network, who's it being run by, what's it called, how many customers and what type of customers do you have, how many buildings and what classification of buildings are there, whether you've installed meter, along with lots of other questions about the performance. What is the heat production capacity of the system? How much heat has it produced in the last 12 months? How much heat has been purchased from your end customers, your final customers? So very useful. And what has happened is that's now resulted in the sort of first national register for heat networks. So we're starting to get much better information on where these heat networks are, how many people are coming, how many people are being provided by them. Now, on the metering side of things, the regulations introduce a duty to install meters. There's two parts to this duty. There's one which applies to only district heating, and that is a requirement that building level meters must be installed. On a district heating system, a building level meter will, as it suggests, register the amount of heat that's been consumed by that building. A building may be one customer, but it's very likely that, as we talked about before, a single building have multiple individual dwellings or business units within that. So actually, if you've only got a building level meter, but you've got multiple customers within there, you have the challenge of then working out how do they proportionally pay for that and split it. The second part of that duty is it applies right across the board, all types of heat networks, and that is for consideration to be given to whether final customer meters need to be installed. So the final customer meter is just, again, quite self-explanatory. It's that final person who's buying heat from the network or paying to put energy back into the network if they're cooling. The way that this is done is that the regulations create 3 classifications of buildings, and it's necessary for heat customers to carry out an assessment to determine the class of the building. Now, the building can be a viable class where meters are mandatory, they must be installed. There's the open class where you are required to install meters if it's not considered to be technically or economically unfeasible. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And then there's the exempt class where there's just no requirement to install meters. There's very few exempt buildings actually. The types of exempt buildings are supported accommodation, purpose-built student accommodation, and an almshouse, which I had to Google that one. It's to do with charitable organisations providing accommodation. So the overwhelming message from the Act and from the government is to fit meters. There is a technical and economical feasibility tool which has been developed. It's not meant as a get out clause. I think there's some concern that's why it was being used, but really what it's meant is for people who've considered it, looked at it, and just for some reason it's been too expensive or technically unfeasible. And what the tool does is allows the developer of the heat network to check that the government agree with that assessment. What we are finding, all of the projects that we've worked on, there's always been the plan from the start to install heat meters. So I've personally never filled in the tool on someone's behalf, but from what I understand about it, it's linked very closely to the cost of gas and electricity. And as the cost of gas and electricity rises, and the cost of the equipment for the metering falls, they start to level out, and it's become increasingly unlikely that any type of buildings will become unfeasible in the future. So really, as I say, the message is to fit meters. If you've got an existing heat network, the revision to the legislation recently, I believe it was 2020, it introduced a requirement for final customer meters to be installed where they're needed by the 1st of September 2020. So if you're running a heat network to be the heat supplier at the moment, that's something to be aware of. Yeah, I was in a session recently where there was someone from Ofgem there, and someone had raised the kind of query of being able to kind of meet the standard, but they wanted to go beyond that, and could they move past the 1st of September date? And the representative from Ofgem was very flexible on that. They felt that it would be absolutely possible to extend that. I think that what I would say is if you are behind on that and don't have a plan yet, is to put your hand up and speak to them. They seem to want to engage rather than enforce. Where a meter is installed, that then introduces a whole raft of other requirements relating to the meters. We need to make sure that they're operational, that they're accurate, that they're regularly checked, serviced, calibrated, and replaced as required. If you have got someone who has a heat meter and you're billing them for the energy used, you really need to give them control over that. So there's a requirement to install temperature control devices as well. And there's also a requirement to display the readings so that the customer can see how much they're using. On the billing side of things, it's fairly straightforward and quite common sense. The Act creates a duty to ensure that customers' bills are accurate, that they're based on actual consumption where that's available, and that they comply with the minimum standards that are required in terms of the frequency for provision of bills and the minimum requirement for billing information that's provided. So some examples of that: if you've got a meter installed, you have to have an accurate bill once a year, very similar to gas and electricity. The billing information, bills should be provided at a minimum quarterly or on request, and the bills should tell you how much energy you've used, what you're being charged for that, and it should also give details of organisations who can provide energy efficiency advice to help you if you want to reduce your usage or you're struggling with your consumption. On the consumer protection side of things, this is very different at the moment to the gas and the electricity markets. So regulation of the energy markets, competition and consumer protection are not devolved matters. So it's not up to the Scottish Government don't have the power to set them. That remains reserved to the UK government. In, I forget if it was December 21 or January 22, but very recently, the UK government have now appointed Ofgem as the UK regulator of the heat network market. So they're now beginning to develop a regulatory framework very similar to what we've got for gas and electricity that will really put a lot of protection in place for consumers around standards of service, customer care, and pricing. As you can imagine, being at the start of that process, it's not going to happen overnight. There is going to be a bit of a time where we have a gap here. And as it stands at the moment, on this side of things, the heat network market is completely unregulated. That's why I said that statement before about 90% of people on heat networks being the same or better off than gas networks. I think that's pretty impressive. And we're bringing in regulation. You can only see how that would improve even further. So in the meantime, what we have is we have the Heat Trust. Now, the Heat Trust is a voluntary consumer protection scheme, and it was launched in 2015. So we're going to go on a moment and talk a little bit about that. I've skipped ahead of my notes here a little bit. What I wanted to say as well is, although that the Scottish Government don't have the consumer protection rights within the Heat and Building Strategy and the Heat Network Act, they do set out their position on this and how they plan to engage the UK government. One of the requests they've made is that when the UK government are legislating, that they give powers to the Scottish government to appoint their own regulator choosing, and to include new powers for Scottish ministers to extend the remit of Ofgem in relation to heat networks. So they are actively engaging with the UK government to bring in enhanced protections. So this is how the Heat Trust describe themselves. They describe themselves as an independent, not-for-profit champion for heat networks that hold suppliers to account for the benefit of everyone involved. Some other bits and pieces as well about what they like to do. And really they do this through incorporating strict customer service standards to heat suppliers, very, very similar to what you would expect for traditional gas and electricity suppliers. They provide access to independent dispute resolution service for the Energy Ombudsman. So that's one of the key findings when research has been done on consumer views on heat networks, is a finding about poor levels of customer service and no independent redress. And they do look to promote best practice, innovation, and continuous improvement in customer service. So there's a way that they do that, but essentially it's rules that your heat supplier will agree to sign up to. That includes support for customers in vulnerable circumstances, customer service and fault and emergency reporting obligations, processes for joining and leaving, lots of requirements around heat meters, heat interface units, heat bill and charge calculations, and how bills are provided and how people can pay, and lots on support with arrears. It includes stuff on suspension and resumption of services, complaints handling and independent redress, like we talked about, as well as privacy and data protection information. So there's lots of stuff in there. It includes guaranteed service levels, compensation payments for customers for interruption of supply, especially for vulnerable householders. It creates a requirement to have robust contingency plans for outages of services. So it's quite a lot to commit to. It's one of the things that's important to understand what you're agreeing to, but there's so many benefits for the heat provider and the heat customers themselves. It really does build confidence there. One of the main reasons that in Scotland we've seen people adopting this is it was a requirement for the low carbon infrastructure transition programme that many heat networks were able to take advantage of within Scotland. So if you wanted that funding from the Scottish Government, you have to agree to sign up to the Heat Trust. That does allow me to seamlessly link to my Scottish Government funding section. So there's two main funds at the moment from the Scottish Government which are supporting the development and rollout of heat networks. We have the Heat and Buildings 2022 Development Funding Invitation, and we have the Heat Network Fund. So the first one is pre-capital support and the second one is capital support. So with the development funding invitation, what this looked to do is to provide match funding at 50%, up to 50% of £50,000. You had to demonstrate the funding gap, and what it intended to do was to fund the development of feasibility studies and investment grade business cases. And the idea behind that is to create a rolling pipeline of projects which have been proven to be feasible and deliverable, and to then support them to go on and make a full application to the Heat Network Fund. The Heat Network Fund itself is open to private and public and third sector organisations to apply, and consortiums are allowed. So it's really quite flexible in terms of who can apply and what can be done with it. It is for projects where the business case is already proven, and that's where the development fund comes in. So they do want to see this turnover of projects happening. That 2022 development funding application has closed now. Speaking to the Scottish Government, they think it's been very successful, potentially oversubscribed, lots and lots of interest in there. So there's lots of interest across Scotland in getting a funding to prove these possible options. The Heat Network Fund itself, the process for that just now is to submit an expression of interest, and members of the Scottish Government team will get in touch to discuss the outline proposals for your project and how to take that forward. How can M4 support your heat network projects? Well, we are involved in some of the largest communal and district heating systems in Scotland at the moment. We are involved in a range of projects at various stages. As I mentioned before, we do support the design and installation side of things, helping to coordinate delivery partners and so on. But as I also said, we're finding that clients where we're being asked to help out is a lot of the stuff before that. So stock surveying and analysis, EIS analysis, energy modelling, feasibility, development of investment grade business cases, funding applications to the Scottish Government, helping to set the procurement strategy, helping to provide consultancy on the compliance, so making sure the project and the solutions that are being provided will meet the metering and billing regulations, will be compliant with the heat trust. We're currently doing quite a number of heat trust applications just now and supporting clients to develop all the processes and support that consumers need around that so that the application can be approved. And finally, as well, we'll support the installation and configuration of your building management systems. One of the great things about IoT and digitization or Internet of Things is that these systems, every aspect of their performance, be it the amount of energy being consumed by the heat pumps, the amount of heat they're producing, the temperatures, flow rates, flow volumes, temperature, it can all be monitored and displayed in real time. And one of the really exciting things is about how that can be used by artificial intelligence and machine learning platforms to understand really what the requirements and the heat demand are within that building and start taking into account all these factors and really drive up the efficiency of these systems even more. So I'm personally very excited for the next 12 months to see the data coming back from these systems and how we can push these systems even further. An example of one of these projects is the one that I mentioned already, where we've got Nicola Sturgeon visiting today. She's there just now getting a tour of the communal and district systems, looking at the plant on the roofs of the high-rise flats, the plant or the centralised plant on the ground. Really just getting a look at what the Scottish Government have helped to fund and celebrating the success of that project. I believe that she is also going to try and speak to some tenants who have been positively impacted by that, and there's lots of them. We're always hearing from tenants about how warm their houses are and how cheap the heat is that they're getting. So the project was with North Glasgow Homes. It's in Springburn in Glasgow. The objective of the project was to look at ways for replacing the old costly existing storage heaters and derelict electric or electric wet central heating systems. These systems were not being used effectively, or in many cases not being used at all because people were just so worried about the cost. So phase one of the project was to install communal systems in 6 high-rise towers. This was air source heat pump plant fitted on the roof, Mitsubishi CHEV units. You can actually see here, this is the crane that was lifting the units onto the rooftop here in Springburn in Glasgow. So that one is 6 blocks. Each of them has about 100 customers, so 600 flats. Phase 2 of the project is a district heat network. This one has an area where there are 7 tower blocks. 4 of them are 16-storey and 3 of them are 9-storey. And there's another 300 houses within these that have now all been connected to district heat networks. And again, that one is using the Mitsubishi air source heat pumps, and it uses a centralised plant on the ground, providing all of the high-rise towers along the street. We supported the client to secure funding from this one. There was around about £5 million has been secured over the 2 phases for the low carbon infrastructure transition programme. And all in, across the 2 phases, there's around about 1,000 homes have been moved to affordable low carbon heat. When we look at some of the statistics for fuel poverty, this is actually one of the most deprived areas in Scotland when looking at statistics from the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation. We know from speaking to tenants and from speaking to the landlord that there's some people in there who are really struggling to heat and eat, and this is really helping them. So we're starting to get some really great news stories back from that about the impact, positive impact it's having on their lives. So that's the end of the prepared slides. I think that my colleague Dave may or may not be in the room, so when I open up the floor to questions, hopefully he can help me out if there's anyone asks anything a wee bit too technical for what I've learned so far. However, if anyone does have any questions or comments, I'd like to open up the floor to that now, and if there's anything that I can't answer, I'm more than welcome to get back to people. So, does anyone in the room have any questions, or do you have any comments or any experiences or anecdotes you'd like to share with regards to heat networks? Everyone's always a little bit shy in these things. It's a safe space, no questions, a daft question. Okay, so these sessions don't always lend themselves overly well to group conversations. If anyone does have a question, you can put up your hand, but my details are on the slide here. I'd very much encourage you to check out the M4 website, check us out on LinkedIn. If you do have any questions for me on consumer protection, metering and billing, Scottish Government funding, anything like that, please do get in touch. My email is there, or you can give me a shout out on LinkedIn.
Hi Gary, it's Dave here. First of all, well done, that was really cool, really interesting as well. I'd like to ask a question just to help those listening in on your recent experience applying for the Heat Trust application. So obviously we've learned a lot going through that process, and I think one of the things that we should really highlight is some of the mandatory things that we need to consider when making that application. Surrounding sort of the protection for tenants, things like if the system fails, etc. So I'm probably throwing you right in the deep end there, but just give us a brief explanation of some of the challenges or some of the observations that we've made as we went through that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the guaranteed service levels is something that is an area where I guess if you've not got a huge desire to be a heat supplier, you might find those a little bit worrying. It is very similar to gas and electricity. It's probably a taste of what's to come for the heat network market, actually. But the service level requirements are very much around the provision of the services. So you state within your heat supply agreement, your contract with your heat customers, what you're going to provide them with. So your flow rates, your temperatures and things like that. You have to commit to notifying if there's going to be any interruption to the services. There are requirements to get people back online within a certain time if there's interruption to the services. For vulnerable tenants, that's quite quick. You have to have them back online quite quickly. What we've found is the Heat Trust want to see a really, really robust contingency plan for this as well. So the first go that we had at this, we highlighted the client's obligations as a social housing provider, which were quite similar. As a social housing provider, there's a lot of requirement to provide heat, hot water, get people back online quickly if you can do. That wasn't good enough. Those were kind of high level commitments. They wanted to see a process, a process for staff to follow if suddenly 100 people don't have heat and you're not going to get back on in a couple of hours. So, I mean, again, this session has been focused very much on social housing providers. A lot of that kind of stuff, social housing providers do have to have those kind of contingency plans anyway, are quite familiar with having to make sure that your tenants stay safe and warm. So it just kind of adds to that. There are penalties for some of this stuff, like you would see with the gas and electricity industry as well. So it's really important to know what you're committing to. I would urge everyone to do it. I think it is a good thing, and you're not going to have a choice soon anyway, so it's worth getting involved now. But yeah, lots of protection for vulnerable customers. It goes so much further than the metering and billing legislation does, in terms of making sure people are given the information that they need to make decisions and to pay and manage their bills.
Thank you very much, Gary. Just while you were chatting there, a question came in regarding calculated payback periods for the Glasgow project. I'd love to be able to answer it. We have a rough estimation on that, but there were several other packages of work that was undertaken at the same time, mainly around fire safety and fire protection. So it's difficult for me to be able to give you the calculated payback straight away, but what I'll do is I'll provide you with the 25-year life cycle report, but we'll need to send that out at the back of this this presentation. What that'll give you is an understanding of how the costs have been associated and what the expected payback period would be. Phase one is quite an extended period because of the significant investment costs that are required. With phase two, there's the introduction of almost a solar farm, and therefore the payback period for phase two is a lot more significant, but we'll provide that information later on. I also asked the question if Ian Heron was on the webinar, which he's confirmed that he is, which is great. It's great to see that a manufacturer is on and listening to the work that we're doing. For those that don't know, Ian works for Mitsubishi, and he has supported the design and development for phase 1 and 2 at North Glasgow Homes, and ultimately, as a direct result of that, his systems have been installed on the tower block. So, Ian, the question that I've got for you is that I know a lot about heat networks, I know a lot about your systems. You know, I've revised them, studied them, broke them, fixed them, so I know an awful lot about them. But so those people that are not on or still on the call may not have as much technical knowledge as what I have. However, one of the good things that I had in the past was the ability to go and see your systems in demonstration type properties or at your manufacturing plant in Scotland. So the question is there support out there from Mitsubishi for those that are interested in learning more about communal air source heat pump systems? Is that something that you guys can support with? And we need to let them be able to speak. So how do I do that? Bear with us, everybody. We'll just try and find Ian in the big group.
I think I might have got him now.
Okay, Ian, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here, Dave. Can you hear me now?
Loud and clear, loud and clear. Hopefully I explained myself what I was trying to get out of you there, but yeah, if you give us some feedback on support, that would be great.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, we're happy to welcome you know, anyone that's interested in the technology or a bit unsure of the technology, either to a site. And I'll be honest, I mean, I've been at Mitsi for 8 years and spoken a lot about communal systems and district heating. At times, I think it's quite daunting. A lot of clients very wary of the technology, very wary of you know, the issues associated with communal heating, or seen to be, and that includes, you know, gas and oil systems that are around. I know there've been issues in the past with heat losses through the pipe work and about the metering and the billing side of things. So that was always a bit of an issue. You know, the project at Springburn has been, you know, a fantastic project, and you know, that was the way that's been designed and implemented has been a great boost. You know, I know you've invited a lot of people along there. We've also invited clients, and you've kindly arranged that, and it's, you know, I think it's given a lot of confidence to potential clients of communal systems that it can be done, and it can be done in a very positive way. But ultimately, in terms of the technology, we're really keen to demystify heat pumps, you know, in terms of use, whether it's individual heat pumps or for use in a communal or district system. The technology's been around for a long time, but we've probably been a lot slower in the UK in taking that up, Dave, as you'll know quite well. So we've got a factory in Livingston. We've got about 1,600 people there now. We don't have a communal system set up there, but we certainly have working heat pump units, and the terms of how they work and what's involved in it are the same, whether it's a heat pump for one house or a heat pump for a block of flats like in North Glasgow. So we welcome anyone to visit us there. Dave, happy for you to give my contact details out. If it's a case of individual heat pumps, again, we can organise visits to either social housing customers or private developments as well. We're always keen to do that. It's really to demystify it, and basically moving forward, heat pumps, as you know, are going to be a big part of the decarbonisation in Scotland. So really welcome to discuss with people, show them the units. Yeah, happy to do that. It's a key part of our job.
Lovely. Well, thanks very much, Ian. Appreciate that. So if anybody wants to reach out and get that opportunity, just give us a shout and we'll pass on those details. Thanks, Ian. There's another question that's came in again regarding the Glasgow project. It provides both heating and hot water, so it's a full system. What I would say is that the Housing Association took the decision to have electric showers in the block. So that was a consideration that they did, and that really, to be honest, like from my point of view, the argument is that the heating that's being heating and hot water comes from electrical source. So if there's going to be an issue with the electrical source, there's probably going to be an issue with the electrical shower as well. So, but that specifically, that was a request from the Housing Association to have that.
And it makes use of large thermal store and heat interface units to make sure that the flats have instantaneous hot water. So there's no lag with the hot water. The hot water is provided instantaneously in the same way that you might expect like a combi boiler.
Yeah, and just talking just very briefly what you was talking about there about the demystifying SRC pumps. And I know that we're probably slightly digressing slightly, but we're starting to see more and more projects of district heat and communal type systems where they are taking that as a consideration. A lot of designs now are moving away from things like CHP, which is combined heat and power, still focusing potentially on biomass, but really now the new kid on the block in my opinion, and I've worked on lots of district heat projects over the years, starting to see a big emphasis now. The beauty of a communal type system is, a communal system could be 2 properties, right up to a large scale interface. So the design and the planning is exactly the same. You need to take all of those considerations in, and Gary touched base with CIBSE's guide, which is called CP1. It's just been refreshed. It's now CP1 2020, and it's a fantastic document because it's what designers use to certify the system to be in compliance with CP1, but also there's a lot of literature to help non-technical people get to grasp what the requirements of the heat network would be. So if you've not seen it before, have a look, go on to the CIBSE website. It's a really good document. You'll find even if you Google it, you'll find lots of literature. Don't be worried about looking at the old stuff because it still provides a plethora of information that would be useful for those of you that potentially are going on the journey to developing your heat networks.
Yeah, they've also got a series of podcasts that they do now as well. I listen to them. I've learned a bit about the technical side of things on heat pumps as well. So good resources there for us non-technical people too.
And us technical people, to be honest. There's a lot to take in, but if you get a heat network right, the performance is unbelievable. You talked about the coefficient of performance. So for every 1 kilowatt of electricity that you put into the system, you can get up to 3 to 4 kilowatts of heat out of it. You know, that's the type of efficiencies that we're looking at on the 4th, 5th generation heat networks, and it's always going to improve. And we're starting to look at how artificial intelligence technology can be used to really improve how the system operates. We were looking at some data points that we've put into the tower blocks this week alone, and the information that is given us, we can identify when individual properties have got high consumption because potentially it's not been commissioned properly. Only 10 years ago, we wouldn't have even thought about doing that, but now we've got the level of information through IoT enabled technology, which allows us to do that. So it's really exciting space. And you touched about it. You know, we're talking at the moment about the district heat projects, and we don't know what the future is going to look like. You know, things have changed over the years. You know, biomass was a real popular heat source probably less than 8-9 years ago. It's kind of out of favour now because the renewable heat incentives went away. The beauty of it is, let's say one of those live district heat projects come to their life and end of life in 10-15 years time, the heat network will still be there. The heat network in effect is agnostic. It doesn't care what's creating the heat. All it cares about is getting the heat from the energy centre or the central plant room to the property that requires that heat. So the investment in the networks, whilst it might be higher than a normal installation, the benefits that will have over the years and in the future, which is sometimes difficult from a commercial and finance point of view to look at, but the benefits of it in terms of long-term infrastructure costs is unparallelable. It's unbelievable to have that in place. Well, Gary, I don't think we've got any more questions coming through.
Nope. But as I say, contact details on the screen, and you know where to find us. So we're excited by heat networks and the developments, and yeah, we're happy to talk all day about it. So do give us a shout. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye bye.